So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I will just have all of our presenters go ahead and introduce themselves and a little bit about why, how the job search during the time of COVID impacts them, whether it was they landed a job, they hired someone, they work in career services, or what that was. So Kelsey, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Hey everyone, my name is Kelsey Ryan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently the hazing prevention coordinator at Florida State University. So I am coming to y'all from the sunny Tallahassee, Florida right now. I think the only place that is not being snowed in. But this has impacted me because in the past couple of months, I was able to successfully navigate a job change. So was working at the University of Memphis and just started at Florida State last month.
Thanks, Kelsey. Jason, would you like to go next?
I'm happy to. Thank you. My name is Jason Eckert, and I serve as the Executive Director of Career Services at the University of Dayton. And while I haven't done a job search in a while, I have been involved in some hiring committees for our institution and have helped many, many students, both undergraduate and graduate students, conduct a job search during the pandemic, as well as our own master's students who are in our higher education administration program.
Wonderful, thank you. Mitch, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, hello, my name is Mitch Joseph Kemplin, and I serve as the Director of Compliance and Safety at Mount Carmel College of Nursing in downtown Columbus. I have landed this job at the start of the COVID-19 outbreak, so I was interviewing for the position in late March and started in May, and I'm actually right now wrapping up hiring a position. So I'm looking at this from both angles of starting a job and hiring a position right now in the time of COVID. So happy to share thoughts and get to have a conversation with everyone today.
Thanks, Mitch. Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Humble Courtney, and I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I serve as Associate Director for Student Engagement at our Honors and Scholars Center at Ohio State. And I have not been job searching recently, but I have supported about 3 graduate students through this process, and also have been involved in 2 professional staff interview searches. And also, I've just been intrigued by this, and so have done some research on what is out there about the etiquette, how we've all been thrown into this, and have done a few presentations on it. So I'm glad to be here today to share what I've learned.
Thanks, Julie. Javanto, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Javanto. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I serve as the Director of Case Management and COVID Response Operations at Ohio University. Much like Mitch, I have had the experience of pandemic job search on both sides. So obviously, the COVID job didn't exist before the pandemic, so I came into my role earlier on and have since we've expanded our office pretty significantly. So I've been in the hiring process and continue to be in the hiring process for new members of our team, which feels like continues to grow every day.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you all for joining us today. We are excited to get some more information to hopefully help people, no matter what phase of the job search process they're in. Hopefully we'll get a lot of great insight. So I'm going to start with our first question, and panelists, just feel free to share for any questions that you feel compelled to. How have you seen the job search process change in the past year?
I think I can hop in and kind of take a stab right off the bat, but I know I've wrapped up doing a search at my last employer. I was at the College of Worcester before starting this position, and we wrapped up a search in September of 2019 that, fast forward to March of 2020, completely different, in just a span of a few months. So you have to be prepared for the unexpected. I think the joys of technology have enabled us to do so many different things and allow us to meet people that we don't have to worry about bringing them on site or worry about doing some of those things that, yes, we miss that interaction, but you're still hopefully meeting folks and being a part of that. I know technology just in the last 8 months has completely changed. When I started doing my search for and interviews for Mount Carmel, I never saw a person. Even through technology, I never saw a person. Everything was on a telephone. You know, um, so it felt like we weren't quite adapting to that technology right off the bat. So, without seeing faces, it's difficult. I would get on their website. Luckily, they have a robust directory where I could pull up faces or look at LinkedIn and find faces, and I'd put them on my computer screen. So it was pretend Zoom while I was on the phone and be ready to kind of navigate that. The questions weren't that much different than when I've interviewed for other positions, really, but just that interaction was different and that ability to relate to people. You have to be willing to jump in, be willing to answer questions, but also be willing to take a moment to allow that awkward silence to happen when you can't see folks and be in that room with them and judge that perception. Someone's going to jump in with a question, someone's going to jump in with a thought, or you're going to jump in with a thought. Just allow that kind of awkward silence to happen and be comfortable with that awkward silence. I learned that in the interviews I did just last week. You got to make that uncomfortable comfortable, and in that search process was kind of weird but liberating at the same time.
I'll echo Mitch's comment about technology and virtual interviews. Having done some hiring for the university, it's been so interesting having people conduct the entire process through Zoom without ever having visited our campus. And I don't know if I would have imagined accepting a job like that, but we have had several really good hires who didn't come to campus prior to accepting the offer from the university. My other comment is that the last year's been a time of great uncertainty, and my institution had quite a bit of furlough activity over the summer when there was a lot of uncertainty regarding enrollment during the height of the pandemic. And in general, it's been a more challenging time to find employment in higher education, certainly in Ohio and the Midwest, compared to the previous 5 years. Now, there are opportunities, and I will probably hear this from Javanto in a moment, but areas that have been affected by the pandemic, in some cases, have been hiring more staff than what they had been doing previously. So if you were interested in a role in health and safety or anything having to do with medical or certainly case management, I've seen those roles increase across the state, whereas some campuses have continued to have a hiring freeze for certain areas of their campus.
I'll kind of jump off of what Jason was saying there. I think he's hit the nail on the head that the landscape looks very different now than it has. In kind of our wave of hiring folks, we saw folks that were fresh out of grad school and seasoned senior level student affairs officers applying for the same role because that's what job searching in a pandemic does, right? Like it changes a little bit of what's expected or what's normal. Excuse me. I think there's a lot of conceptions that folks have going into a job search, both about others, right, and what they expect out of them and the ways that they will navigate that, and for themselves. And the pandemic has turned things on its head for a lot of folks. So we've been fortunate to be able to interview and offer for a number of positions that are fully virtual, right? So the traditional like geographic limitations are out the window, right? Like we're a fully remote team at this point. And so being able to change some of those dynamics. And then also I think the ways that folks are navigating their careers, given furlough, right, and the uncertainty that we're experiencing at many institutions of higher education, and the changing home dynamics of we're living through a global pandemic. And maybe my family situation was great when I was leaving for work, but now that I'm here, I'm realizing that something needs to change. And so I think there's been a pretty seismic shift in priorities and approaches and the ways that folks are navigating all of those pieces, which has been fascinating.
Yeah, I'll jump off of that. What Javanto said too is that I think the things that we thought were typical, so for example, timelines, institution timelines, like there used to be a typical maybe flow of the year when it came to people posting, when institutions were posting positions, when you could expect maybe being like called upon for interviews and everything. And that has really shifted. And it for good and for bad, it can make you a little nervous or anxious, but also knowing that you could get, take a job and it could start very quickly because of technology, because there aren't these factors where moving and other things that you would have to counter into a timeline. The other thing that I've also noticed is that the tactics that we're using now, so some of the graduate students, 2 of them, and the one that I have who's going through her search this year, have noticed that that first step to being invited to what we might have typically referred to as an on-campus is actually something that's happening at a one-way interaction. And so some institutions are using, and not just institutions, but I think this role or this type of interviewing has been in place for other industries. So if you're looking, into maybe marketing or jumping outside of education, they're using this computer software where you are answering questions and recording yourself, and they're time limited, and also very directive and specific. I've also had one of our graduate students, she wasn't able to record herself, but she had to write out a narrative of how she would answer one of these questions. So we're seeing this versus transactional, but more one-way types of interactions that happen that then get you invited to that next point. And so that's just a shift. And there are actually 2 programs that do this, HireVue and Spark. Think Jason, am I right? So I'm seeing, so if you see that, don't be alarmed. It is okay. It's not something that should scare any of us away, but it just might be something we might see more, become more typical.
I just want to echo a couple pieces that have already been touched on. The technology piece, I agree, that's probably the biggest change that I've seen. A couple years ago, when I was doing my first round of interviewing right out of grad school, pretty much the way that it worked was that the first round was phone interviews, and then the second round was on campus. Occasionally, the first round would be some sort of video chat, but it would be Skype. And now I feel like we're all doing everything on Zoom. So the first and second rounds are on Zoom. The only difference is the second round is longer. The other thing I would echo is that we're all, I feel like, giving each other a little bit more grace in this process. A few years ago, I remember I was doing a Skype interview for my first round and I was still in grad school. And so I had rented out a room in the library so that I could be there and not be disrupted. And some student opened the door and walked into my study room while I was in the middle of the interview. And I just froze and panicked and didn't know how to handle that situation and did not handle it the best way that I could have probably. But now, again, we still try and find a quiet space with proper lighting and all of that kind of stuff. But we all recognize that things happen and we may not be in a space that's just with, just by ourselves. We may have a spouse, we may have kids, we may have a pet. And so if one of them walks in the background or pops on screen for a second, we just kind of roll with it. So I appreciate that from that standpoint.
Wonderful, thank you. And I will share again, for those that have joined a little bit later, feel free to use the chat feature if you have questions throughout the presentation, and then even at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. for those of you that did job search, how did the process go for you? Was it different than past job searches? Did you visit campus prior to starting? How many interviews did you have? What was the timeline from job posting to offer? So feel free to share any or all that you would like.
I'll go ahead and start. Like I said, I think the biggest change was going from a phone interview and then an on campus to doing Zoom interviews the whole time. I would say the process was the same from applying to getting the first round interview. But the process changed from first round to second round in that timeline went a lot quicker. And I think that goes back to the point that we talked about earlier, where most places aren't doing on-campus interviews right now. Everything's staying virtual. So you don't have to, the employer doesn't have to account for scheduling flights and hotels and all of that kind of stuff. So the second round can start a lot quicker. And then, like I said, the second round was over Zoom, but was just a lot longer with a lot of different engagement pieces from different areas of campus. But my employer made sure that they were putting a lot of breaks in there, again, to account for Zoom fatigue. I feel like that's something in my previous interviews that may have been missed when you're on campus, is it's go, go, go the whole time. So making sure to account for, some time for you to step away from the computer was great. I was not able to visit campus. And so that was one of the things that one of my colleagues did, was actually created a video of the office and some hotspots on campus so that I could still see it. And so that's something that I would definitely recommend for people that are job searching, is to ask for that. If that's an opportunity for somebody to maybe Zoom you and walk you around, or create a video or something like that, so you can still get a feel even if you can't be there in person.
Kelsey just gave me a great idea for my search that I'm wrapping up and doing second round right now. I like the videos of the office in that space, because we encourage folks to, during the interview process, we were encouraging them to take our virtual tours that we set up through admissions and work with that to just see our space that way. But I like that idea of giving them a more personalized, here's what, when we do come back, here's your workspace. So I do like that. Thanks, Kelsey. I'm stealing that and using it.
You're welcome. I'll let my colleague know that was helpful.
Yeah. But I mean, exactly what Kelsey said, the timeline after first round to second round is very accelerated. Especially in this search I'm doing, we finished first round interviews on Friday, and we're having our first second round interview on Thursday of this week for a candidate. So being able to make that happen, because we don't have to plan out travel and other logistic pieces, it's really helpful at this point. And we're not, you'll see a couple places do things differently, where Kelsey may have done that fuller day of second rounds. We're doing it with, specific targeted different Zoom meetings throughout a couple of days, where one day you're going to meet with, our associate VP for student services, our registrar, other folks, just at different times and different Zoom meetings that way. So that way it spaces that out and does things a little different in that aspect. But it's essentially the same thing. We're going in and you're seeing these different folks, you're getting a taste of a wider variety of campus. So that timeline really accelerated. When I was doing my search in March, same thing, because they wanted to they weren't sure what was going to happen at that point in time. So they wanted to get someone on board and someone in place quickly. And luckily at that point in time, this was a position they interviewed for and expected, we need this. So in that area, I was a little lucky. But you're going to see, I think Jason mentioned this earlier, those different types of positions are going to open up and be open to those different areas that may not have existed before. Like, Javanto mentioned COVID case management before March did not exist. And compliance and safety, I'm overseeing our COVID operations, did not really exist in this capacity before March. So be open to those different things. You may not see some traditional res life or student engagement type jobs open up right now, but be open to something interesting and different, and explore those areas and see what's out there. But be ready for a very accelerated and very quick timeline from start to finish there. And we're hoping to onboard someone and have the person hired next week after we finish our second rounds. So with an anticipated start date of either March 1st or mid-March. So trying to move very quickly on some positions.
Yeah, I'll dive in there. I think much like other elements of the pandemic, time during pandemic times is weird. In some ways, it moves at lightning speed, and then sometimes it crawls to a snail's pace, even more so than hiring in higher ed typically does. So to Mitch's point, we have created, interviewed, and onboarded a position from its inception to you've started work in three business days, which is about as fast as I think humanly possible. And at the same time, just today, I'm having conversations with folks that applied for our pool position in October that are now getting to the, okay, we interviewed last week and we can start onboarding next week. And so there's fits and starts, I think, always, but particularly during COVID, the timeline can be super accelerated, and it can also be slowed pretty significantly. Know that is not necessarily a reflection on you as a candidate. In fact, likely is in no way a reflection on you as a candidate. And it may give you some interesting insight into what's happening on campus or in that office, and it may mean nothing, right? Like, so don't read into it too much. But I think that is one of the areas where identifying colleagues that either have some understanding of the campus or the office or the community culture, right, or connecting with somebody that can give you a little bit of insight of kind of what's the flavor of things that are happening on campus right now, can be helpful to discerning and determining a little bit of what's going on kind of the timeline front.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Javanto has said about that, because I think things are still being figured out, and that going into the summer, we're not really sure what fall's going to look like and what we're going to be able to do. And so the traditional of like job postings being posted right now is not normal. And from my experience, if you are within the grad student searches, is that they often didn't find jobs. It moved quickly once they got there, but it didn't happen until like late May, June-ish. And so don't lose hope. I think, a lot of institutions are on that like July 1 fiscal year and have to get, the approvals to either replace positions or not. And so, but knowing that you can still get a job very quickly, it can still happen very quickly, but the postings might be delayed a little bit more.
The other piece that I would add is, and we've kind of hinted at this a little bit, is that depending on the institution, there may be the opportunity to start remotely. So you don't have to physically be in that area to start the job, which is definitely a change from pre-COVID times. So they may ask you to start quicker than you were anticipating, put in your 2 weeks and then start after that 2-week time, but you don't have to physically be in the area until a month or so later.
Wonderful, thank you. So if you are someone that hired a new employee, can you talk a little bit about what that process looked like? So how is it different? Did you have to go through any additional approvals to get someone hired during this time, especially with like furloughs or budget freezes or anything like that? And then what was your timeline like compared to maybe what it might normally look like?
I think Javanto and I have kind of done some searching. I don't know about the others right now, but when I was hiring a staff member, we were replacing someone who had left the position after fall semester. So it was a essential position that we were replacing, and made this cause case for that to be filled. But some places may not be like that. Like I think Julie mentioned, that fiscal year piece may want to wait to see how that budget line plays out and see where they can replace someone, and if they can. I know when I onboarded myself and plan on onboarding somebody, it's going to be all virtual. It's going to be all remote. It's going to be, you know, we have iPads here and we'll probably walk around the campus and kind of do a personalized walking tour together. I wish I could have that little robot thing that wheels the iPad around, but not that technologically savvy right now or have that capability. But, how am I going to bring this person onto a team that once we're able to get back in person, you'll need to quickly assimilate to that role and to this culture. So I think that's where I'm still kind of playing around in my head. How do I orient a person to our culture without them being here? Because this is someone we hope will stay for a good while. And how do I do that? So I think that's still an evolving process for a lot of folks hiring right now. We just don't know what that's looking like at this point. But I do know, it's going to be a lot of using technology, using that to bring that person on board, and just working through those pieces. And how do we build that community? That's important to me. One of the things that, I'm a believer in, there's a book out there, Power of Moments. And how do we create a powerful moment for that onboarding experience? Do we send them a welcome package, with some college swag, some, goodies, some things like that, some handwritten notes? One thing that really made an impact when I started at Mount Carmel was, I got a handwritten note from the president welcoming me to the position, little thank you notes here and there from folks who I interviewed with. So that was helpful. So I may try to replicate some of that, because it's all about how do you create that purpose without feeling like you're losing something because they're virtual. So things I'm rattling around in my head and brainstorming and taking notes as I go, like the video of the office thing, but it's a work in progress that way, and trying to figure out and navigate that. And like as interviewers, we need to we're given grace in our interview. As hiring managers, we need to be given grace too, is trying to figure out and navigate that process, because it's new to us too.
I've been involved in 3 searches and have been in more intimately, I guess, involved or heavily involved in 2 onboarding experiences. And so some of the strategies that we've tried and have been successful, and I think are fair for you to ask as the interviewee, is what is involved in that. And one of the things is finding like a buddy, right? Someone who's in the office, and asking that person to kind of like take the new person under their wing in a way. And what that's involves is like more communication. And so I think that is a positive thing that we're seeing out of here, is the touch points, like someone that you could check in with on a daily basis, or someone that you just, go to figure out where to go. And so I think it's fair to ask, what does that look like? Will you be given, for lack of a better term, we're calling it like an onboarding buddy, but that's something that could be there too. I also think is as I've seen my graduate students go through this, and as we've welcomed some people into these larger teams, and I think it's good for us anyways too, is that when you're having meetings and interviews, is to ask some more like, I don't know what you would call it, like not softer questions, but what do you do? Like try to see into like, what's the personality? What's the culture around that office? And if you're inviting an interviewee, or if you get to be a part of that, pay attention to the time before maybe a Zoom meeting starts. So, when you're in there, are people talking to each other? Are they joking around a little bit? Or is it blank screens, things like that? You don't want to read into all of that, but those are the types of things that can give you a little bit of a sense about like, the office and how it might function. And so the onboarding buddy was the big thing that I think has really helped us. And then the same in the interviewing is that I tried to ask and get to know a little bit more. You might be asked a little bit more about how do you keep yourself motivated, being feeling like you're an island unto yourself in a way. And I think that sometimes in our jobs normally you might feel that way, but now you really feel that way. And so being prepared or giving it some thought to your, for yourself, like, how am I going to keep myself motivated? Or am I going to be comfortable with asking a lot of questions and asking, it's fair to ask the interviewers too, is like, how do you deal with that? If someone's asking you a lot of questions, sometimes it won't be seemed annoying. At least on our end, we haven't seen that. So, or I haven't been annoyed by it. I think it's a good sign of taking initiative and keeping yourself engaged in your position.
I'll add to Julie's point. I think pandemic times have further exacerbated some of the experiences that folks have already had through job search, both existing inequities, right, and like the job search particulars, right? So Mitch was talking a little bit about like the awkward silence between questions and answers. Those exist when we're in person too. They just feel a little bit more awkward, right, or differently awkward now that we're in the virtual format. I think that experience is true of lots of different pieces, right? So from my perspective, as a hiring manager, right, the doing things virtually, pandemic elements of it has pushed us to have to be particularly intentional about like, how are we structuring things? How are we supporting this candidate as they move through the interview, recognizing that I'm not going to have the 5 minutes walking from one building to a next to prep them for, here's the people that you're going to find in the room, here's what this is going to look like. Having talked with some colleagues, right, where they show up for a Zoom interview that they think is going to be a one-on-one, and it turns out there's 9 people in that Zoom. That's an unpleasant surprise. Nobody likes surprises, right? That happens in on-campus interviews too. Don't do that, right? And it's a little bit easier to forget that step in the virtual format of like, we don't need to send out a calendar invite of everybody needs to get to, Alumni Hall 117. It's just click the link, right? And so it's easy to click the link and forget like, oh, I should probably prep Joe candidate that there's going to be 9 people and here's who they are. To give folks a little bit of support and assistance in kind of navigating that space. I think the onboarding piece is particularly, as all of us have kind of talked about from different lenses, is particularly important because it undeniably looks different, right? So there's no water cooler, for a proverbial water cooler. I don't think I've ever seen anyone actually hang out at a water cooler, but right, that idea of like, there's spaces where we can gather when we're in person that we don't have those spaces. So in our office, right, like we've designated a water cooler meeting that every Wednesday we gather, there's no agenda, and we do the water cooler stuff. And it's not the same, right? Like we try to structure out some fun social elements, but it is, oh yes, the coffee pot meetings, right? That's like as close to as we're able to get given the virtual format. I think the other piece, when I think about like the pandemic further exacerbating elements that were already true in the job search, it's the need for candidates and folks in the process in general, but specifically candidates, to identify the elements that are going to be important for them and find ways to ferret that out in the interview process. And I think Julie was touching on some of this. Figure out what it is that you need out of a work environment, out of that community, out of that job, and then figure out how you're going to discern if this is going to be a good fit for you or not. And I think some of it certainly you can patently ask about, right? Just that direct question, and some of it you want to discern through the process as well. And so one of the things that I think is particularly important for me is like how folks adapt, incorporate, and respond to feedback. Now, if I ask anybody, how do you respond to feedback? Everybody's answer is going to be, oh, I love feedback, right? Like, give it to me. It's great. I absolutely incorporate all of it. That may or may not be true, right? And so like finding ways to discern, I don't ask about feedback in that way because I don't find those answers helpful, right? However, like here's what I do to figure out those elements, because I know that that's important. Like that is a flag for me of the office or the institutional culture that is going to shape my success, my happiness, right? My engagement in that workspace.
I think Julie mentioned earlier, more of soft questions in interviews. So just a little tidbit from me, 2 of my favorite questions to ask when I'm in the interview process. Of my future colleagues, I ask each of them what their favorite thing about the city is to learn more about them. And then of my future supervisor, I ask them how they help to boost morale when morale seems low in the office.
Thanks, those are great. I have one last question. So whether you're job searching or hiring or helping someone with a job search, what are any tips, tricks that you might offer that you might have, kind of discovered in the last year?
I can share a couple, and a number of my fellow panelists have mentioned the concept of flexibility, and that's my advice to any job seeker right now. I talk a lot about how the job search could be like a funnel, and when you're early on in the process, your funnel should be wide and you're considering a diverse array of functional areas within higher education. And so right now, if you think your passion is in housing and residence life or only in academic advising, you may, based upon your geographic availability, be limited in terms of the number of schools hiring in those areas. And so to the extent that you're possible, that you're available, I would encourage a job seeker to expand that funnel both from a functional area as well as a geographic perspective. My second bit of advice is that in any job search, no matter the industry, no matter the pandemic status, networking is always going to be helpful in terms of opening possible doors and in terms of gaining information from people who may be in the know. People sometimes feel awkward about this idea of networking and calling people who work on a given college campus. It works, and I find that higher education is more of an open network compared to some of our corporate counterparts. And so making a polite phone call, asking for information, requesting an informational interview, these tactics do work within higher education. And I encourage job seekers to use them, especially when looking for a job at a college or a university.
A couple of things I've noticed and wanted to pass on to folks who are interviewing are kind of just some of those practical pieces. Remember, you're still interviewing for a job, so what you wear matters. It from head to toe. I know we can hide behind a desk and a window and wear sweatpants all the time and look clean from the waist up and neck up, but that attitude of wearing professional clothing pays off, and you can tell in an interview your confidence, your swagger, basically. How do you feel in that interview? It makes a difference in what you're wearing. So I still, even though you're in a virtual environment, dress up, look the part, look like you want the job. And the other one is also, look around you. What do you see around you? We've heard this a lot. I did in the interviews I did last week, some folks did not have a very clean background. You think that'd be common sense by now, but if you're using a living room or using a space, make sure it's tidy and picked up. I know we don't mind, and I didn't mind in the interviews, the cat running in the background or the dog interruption or things like that, but at least have it looking clean and looking nice. So if you can't accomplish that, virtual backgrounds are helpful. But with that, make sure you're wearing contrasting clothing so you don't look like a floating head and a ghost, the way that computer system makes your head look and that shape of your body look. So test it out with a friend. Get on there and make sure you're playing with your camera settings, your Zoom settings, and all of that, because you can see your video before you jump in. Use that opportunity to tweak the lighting and those sort of things. So nothing's more awkward than just seeing a floating pair of glasses or a floating head in that interview. So play around with it. I know we all saw the great, probably a lot of us saw the cat video of the lawyer being the cat in the courtroom. Check your filters, make sure those are all off. It can provide a good laugh, but know how to turn them off when you do get in there. But play a little bit, play around, make sure you're knowing what you're doing and getting in there and putting your best foot forward like you do. Even if you were in person, you'd want that best foot forward. So keep that up, and no matter what environment it is.
I just want to echo what Mitch said about a clean background or having a clean area, because that's where I think people get messed up. So like keeping in mind a clean area, clean mind, or like, you know, organized. If your area is organized, you're probably going to come across more organized and confident in your answers. And so it is a lot more about, I think, psychology and how we feel and how you come across in this format. So another hint that have seen a lot is that practicing in front of a mirror, because you have to get used to seeing yourself. Maybe you're a person that talks with your hands a lot. I do. And so as you can see, I'm sitting here trying to keep that at a minimum, because we're all in this new environment together. And so even if you are on, you know, the interviewer's end, you don't want them to be remembering, you know, things around you or your outfit or, you know, other things. You want them to remember what you're saying. And so what you can do to mute those other distractions are going to be really important in this format. So I just wanted to echo what Mitch was saying.
All right, well, that was the end of our questions. Doesn't look like there's any questions in the chat, but thank you to our panelists who graciously offer their experience and their expertise today. We really appreciate it. And I will go ahead and post this recording on the OCPA website. If you are not part of OCPA and would like to have the recording, you can email me. I will put my chat in, or my email in the chat if you would like that. But thank you so much to everyone for attending, and have a wonderful day. Stay safe.
Thank you.